I'm Martin Hercombe. I'm a reader in French studies and I work on political culture of the early 20th century in France, and I have an interest in cycling history amongst other things.
I'm Erica Hanna. I'm a lecturer here in history and I'm also a keen cyclist.
So what we're doing is we're looking at the way that cycling used to feature in the city and the way that cycling used to dominate cities. And what we've been doing is looking not just at the evidence of the extent of cycling in the past, but we've also been looking at why cycling disappeared.
So the history of cycling in Bristol in many ways mirrors the history of cycling across Britain during the 19th and 20th centuries. So the bicycle was invented as almost a leisure vehicle, a playful form of mobility for the middle or upper class, obviously known as the dandy horse. And then the later 19th century, the safety bike was invented, which was a much more practical utilitarian vehicle which could be bought fairly cheaply. And from that period we begin to get cycling is the dominant way in which working class people are getting to work.
We wanted to get a range of perspectives on what cycling in Bristol is like today. And we wanted to compare that with the past, but in particular we want to think about what needs to change in the future. So what we did was we got our 10 volunteers, we gave them 2 suggested routes around the centre of Bristol, which highlight transport in Bristol before the advent of the car. The routes basically go around Spike Island, around the harbour, and then back out under the Cumberland Basin, back onto Spike Island and so on and so forth. But having cycled the route ourselves, we were also wondering whether they would be distracted by the impediments, all the things that lie in the way of the cyclist today, and which we knew they wouldn't be able to complete unproblematically.
Bristol is, as we well know, massively bombed during the 20th century, and that alongside a very, very interventionist town planning in that period means that we get a really big transformation in the urban landscape in the 40s, 50s and 60s. And really this is a period in which planners are designing a utopian city for a modernist future. And they take absolutely no account of cyclists at all. So despite the fact we have an awful lot of people who own and use bicycles, we get a city designed without cycle lanes, without quiet roads for cycling in. And really the city becomes quite an inhospitable environment for cyclists. So cyclists are actually wholly invisible in the mechanisms town planners are using, despite the fact they're measuring numbers of cars, predicting numbers of cars, and actually measuring numbers of walkers. At no point are town planners of the mid-20th century period trying in any way really to measure or design a city for cyclists.
Half of the participants were given a dossier of material which contained information about cycling in the past. And we wanted to see whether that informed the way they then thought about cycling and the way they recorded those experiences. The other half of the group had no support material, they were just given a couple of maps. What we're trying to see is, did the people who had the more historically informed approach, did they record different experiences? Did they have different perceptions of the city as a result of that? Or is there no substantial difference? Because one of the fundamental questions we're asking is, what role does culture have in shaping the way we think about cycling?
I always like the way you can hear the city on a bike and you're using your ears much more. You sort of get a sense of the weather, sense of the buildings around you, and you get a much more you feel yourself riding up hills and down hills, and so you get a much more textured and detailed understanding of the city than you do from a car.
We want to end the project with a discussion which we hope will help answer some of those questions about why it is that cycling has declined to the extent that it has, but what might help revive it. Because we do think there is a revival of interest in cycling going on in this city, and we want to encourage it.
The project actually inspired me to get back on my bike. I was considering it, and actually the first couple of weeks that I was working here, I was getting the bus in and getting really frustrated with the bus, with the expense of it and the amount of time that I was waiting for it.
I guess my perception of Bristol living in quite a built-up area is that it's not particularly green. But cycling down the Portway and looking over to Lee Woods and it being really green and contrasted against the big warehouses, the Create Centre, was quite striking. And then down the Cumberland Basin, which was really green. It was just a really pleasant ride, and I hadn't expected it to be.
I've cycled to work, I've cycled to explore, I've done lots of that. Especially after I moved to Bristol 11 years ago, I did a lot of exploring, either running on foot or on a bike, and it was a really good way to get to know my new surroundings.
The main thing I've noticed is it's really hilly. I sort of knew it was hilly because I've driven up the hills in the car and walked up them, but actually cycling up them makes it really hilly. The good thing about that is it's a beautiful city and you get some amazing views when you're cycling in, which is really lovely.
I cycle to work every day and it's not always a pleasurable experience. I cycle across the city and I cycle across a range of really built up big roundabouts. So I cycle across 6-lane roads, and it's actually quite a difficult experience every day, and you have to really keep your wits about you.
I did notice quite a few people playing Pokemon Go, I think, which is an interesting one for cyclists, because not only do you have to contend with pedestrians being somewhat unexpected, you also have to contend with them suddenly stepping out in front of you to try and catch a new Pokemon. So another one to add to the risk of cycling. But
in terms of cycling in Bristol, the cycle network is very poor. At some points there are cycle paths which will then suddenly disappear. Other points you do have cycling paths which will go for a long way but will have trees interspersed or different obstacles where you have to go off the cycling path onto either pedestrian route or jump onto the road and then back onto the path.
Yeah, I think because there are definitely places I avoid. There are some huge roundabouts. I'm a confident cyclist, so I'm happy to go around most things. But there are some bits of Bristol which I would probably avoid because they're not cycle friendly. As much as this city tries, there are some areas that are effectively no go. And I've always been. I was amazed when I moved to Bristol just how many people are on the pavement because I've lived in this country. I've lived in London, Cardiff, and Portsmouth, where I grew up, and in none of those cities was there a massive pavement cyclist population, whereas there seems to be in Bristol, which. When I first moved here, I found really frustrating, and then I quickly realised that if you're not a particularly confident cyclist, that's perhaps where you go for safety.
Bristol's an odd city for cycling. It's allegedly a cycling city. It's heavily promoted, and in places there's some really, really brilliant cycling infrastructure that's great to use. The Bristol to Bath railway path, which I now commute along in the morning, is perfect. It's, there's things that can be done to improve it. There are always things that can be done to improve it, but there's not much really that you could ask for. It's segregated from traffic. It's a decent enough surface, and it gets you where you want to be without having to stop all the time.
When I was told about this project, I thought that would be interesting because I've never thought about cycling around a UK city for fun. My only experience of cycling around a city has been Amsterdam, which is a city that's set up for the bike and the bike rules and the car doesn't really get a look in.
I probably feel more a part of the city on my bike, certainly than I do on a car, or in a car, or in a bus. So I think just feeling more a part of it is what's come across more than anything else for me.
And I went for my bike ride on a warm summer's evening and it was particularly warm and the leaves on the trees were really green and luscious and the water even looked quite inviting, which is something I never thought I'd say about a river running through the centre of Bristol.
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely the way that I'm going to carry on getting into work. And I think once I am fitter and stronger and once I'm less achy, I will probably cycle for pleasure as well. And if I was to move into the city centre, which is a plan, then I wouldn't have so far to cycle into work and I would probably cycle for pleasure then as well.
So I thought it was going to be quite a different experience cycling around Bristol. And actually, there was loads to see. and normally I cycle out in the countryside, and it's lovely, and I love being outdoors, but actually cycling around the city was quite distracting, probably almost dangerous at times, because you're seeing all these things that you've never noticed before.
Yeah, whether it's running or cycling or walking, I'm very nosy when I'm out and about. I clock everything around me. Yeah, my wife says I'm slightly bizarre in that respect. But primarily people. I mean, I would say on the trip in this morning, I'm normally on Wells Road is fast. You've got to be completely on the ball. There are buses, there are a hell of a lot of cars. There are lots of other cyclists and motorbikes. But this morning I came back routes more, and I saw kind of the human element more, I would say. I saw somebody kissing his wife goodbye on a doorstep. I saw someone carrying her kids down the street and struggling with that. So I felt more in tune with human Bristol, I guess, rather than traffic Bristol.
So before, when I thought about cycling around the city, I thought there was going to be loads of traffic, and maybe it's because of the time of day I was cycling. Actually, I found the car drivers to be really considerate and give me a wide berth, wider than when I'm out cycling along country lanes. So that was great. The downside was actually pedestrians being less aware of the bike, and I know that Bristol's supposed to be a cycling city, and I think it's set up if you want to commute for cycling, but not really. It's not particularly well set up for cycling for recreational purposes.
I'm grateful to the project and Bristol Institute that funded the project for getting me back cycling again, and saving me money and making me fitter and stronger, as you're bound to get when you're cycling.